Hello friends, I welcome you all to this class. This is the analysis class, and this class will be considering this topic, the absolute value. For any x element of real numbers, the absolute value of x denoted by mod x is defined by absolute value of x will be equal to x if x is what? Positive. So this tells us that absolute value of any positive real number is what? That very real number. So absolute value of positive 2 is 2, absolute value of positive 3 is 3, absolute value of positive 4 is 4, and so on. Then absolute value of x will be 0 if x is 0. Then absolute value of negative real numbers will be negative of that real number. So which means that, for instance, absolute value of negative 2 is negative of negative 2, which will give you positive 2. Absolute value of negative 3 will be negative of negative 3, which will give you positive 3. So, which tells us that absolute value of any real number will always be what? Positive. So, let's look at properties of absolute value. The first property is that absolute value of x will be greater than or equal to 0 for all x elements of real numbers. Just from what I said, absolute value of any real number will always be positive. Then the absolute value of x, y will be equal to absolute value of x multiplied by absolute value of y for all x, y elements of real numbers, which tells us that absolute value of the product of any two real numbers will be the product of their individual absolute values. Then absolute value of the quotient of two real numbers, that's absolute value of x divided by y will be the quotient of their individual absolute value will be equal to absolute value of x divided by absolute value of y, provided that this y at the denominator is not 0. So the first property is that absolute value of x plus y will be less than or equal to absolute value of x plus absolute value of y, which tells us that absolute value of sum of two real numbers will be less than or equal to the sum of their individual absolute value. So if the fifth property tells us that if absolute value of x is less than epsilon, then x will will lie between negative epsilon and positive epsilon. So absolute value of x less than epsilon if and only if x is lying between negative epsilon and positive epsilon, where this epsilon is any positive real number. So let's do some proof here. This asks us to prove that for all x, y elements of real numbers, absolute value of x plus y will be less than or equal to absolute value of x plus absolute value of y. So we are proving this fourth property. So let's start the proof. Solution or proof. Let's start the proof. Now, absolute value of x will be greater than or equal to x, and negative absolute value of x will be less than or equal to x for all x elements of real numbers. So this, what I wrote here is that for any real number at all, the absolute value of that real number will always be greater than or equal to that real number. So equality will only hold if the real number is positive from the definition. So for instance, if x is 2, the absolute value of 2 is same thing as 2. So equality will hold. What's happened if x is negative? Let me say negative 3. Then absolute value of negative 3 is what? Positive 3. So positive 3 will be greater than what? Negative 3. So that's what that says. Then this second one is that the negative of absolute value of x will be less than or equal to x. Now this, absolute value of x will be positive. Absolute value of any real number will be positive. For instance, if x is 2, for instance, then absolute value of 2 will be what? Positive 2. But you are taking negative here, negative of what you are going to get. So negative of 2, you have negative 2, right? So but negative 2 will be strictly less than what? 2, right? Remember I said, for instance, x, if x is 2. So that's what you are going to get. You are going to get negative 2 less than what? 2. Then if x is negative, let me say negative 3, then absolute value of negative 3 is what? Positive 3. But we have negative outside here. So negative or positive 3, you still have your negative 3. then negative 3 will be equal to what? Negative 3. At that time, the equality will hold here. So with these two conditions, this implies that what? Negative absolute value of x will be less than or equal to x, less than or equal to absolute value of x. Similarly, negative absolute value of y will be less than or equal to y, less than or equal to absolute value of y. So I can call this first one equation 1, call this second one equation 2. So I combine the inequality here. You know, absolute value of x is greater than or equal to x. So x is greater than or equal to negative absolute value of x, which means that negative absolute value of x will be less than or equal to x, and x will be less than or equal to absolute value of x. The same thing will happen for y, because x and y are real numbers. So from the question, x and y, they are real numbers. So since it happened to x, it will happen to y, because it's for any real number you pick. So this is what we have here. So let's continue. So let's add the two inequalities. Add 1 and 2. We add 1 and 2. We will get, so let's just write it. Adding 1 and 2 will get, so let's add the two inequalities. If you add this right side, you have what? Negative absolute value of x, negative absolute value of y. I'm adding the first thing we have and the both of them, negative absolute value of x, negative absolute value of y. Then we have, next we have less than or equal to. Then let's add the middle. The middle we have here is x and y. That's x plus y. Then next we have less than or equal to. Then at the ending of both inequality, we have absolute value of x at the first inequality. Then we add it to the second one, absolute value of y. So we have added these two inequalities, right? This implies, let's factor out negative from here. This will be negative of absolute value of x plus absolute value of y. Right? I factored out negative from this. Less than or equal to x plus y, less than or equal to absolute value of x plus absolute value of y. So this is what we have. But look at the fifth property, right? Look at the fifth property. You know that x, absolute value of x is positive, absolute value of y will be positive. If you add two positive real numbers, you get what? A positive real number. So now, if this absolute value of x plus absolute value of y, which is a positive real number, if we call it epsilon, you notice that this middle quantity is lying between the negative of the epsilon and positive of what? Epsilon, right? From this first property. If from this fifth property, if x is lying between positive epsilon and negative epsilon, so this thing will happen. Absolute value of x will be less than what? Epsilon. So this inequality, you can have strictly less than, you can have less than or equal to, and that. So this thing is what we have. So if x plus y is our epsilon now, that because, sorry, if absolute value of x plus absolute value of y is would be, if it is our epsilon, because absolute value of x will be what? Positive. Absolute value of y will be what? Positive. If we take it to the epsilon, notice that this middle quantity, x plus y, lying between the positive of the epsilon and negative of the epsilon. So this thing simply means that what? Absolute value of the middle. So this condition and this fifth property will hold. Absolute value of this x plus y will be less than or equal to that epsilon. So that's x, absolute value of x plus absolute value of y. So this is what we have, and this completes the what proof. So this absolute value of the middle one will be less than or equal to what? The absolute value of x plus absolute value of y. So thank you so much for being part of this video. See you in the next video. You are expected to subscribe to the channel for you to be able to get more videos and be part of our subsequent classes. Thank you so much.